For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter. So, Craig, it's almost fall.
It is.
I'm really enjoying. I do warm coffee all summer, so it's not really a big shift for me. Mm-hmm. I do admit, though, I do like the pumpkin spice latte at Starbucks more than the pumpkin spice latte at Dunkin' Donuts. Is that wrong to say that out loud?
No, I mean, I'll think you're a fair weather snob, but that's okay.
I don't buy any food at Starbucks, if that makes you feel better.
Oh,
I don't buy
that's
the donuts
good.
there. I just buy the coffee there. So
that's okay.
So what are you drinking tonight? What are you having for food or beverage there?
I'm just getting. I'm just coming off a rough 2 weeks, Russ. I'm just having a nice coffee.
Yeah, it's been super busy, and I think one of the things I wanted to chat with you about now that I had a chance to sit down here is what did you think about Gen Con 50? I mean, there was a lot of firsts here at Gen Con. It was well, first of all, the 50th anniversary, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It was the most space it ever took up. They spanned even more. In fact, it felt like the food truck area was even controlled and badge accessible, like it was part of the convention.
Right.
But then also, it was the first Gen Con ever that I remember ever selling out.
Yes, I believe it was I know it was the only one where they put out signs everywhere.
Right.
That it was sold out.
But I remember there were 4-day badges sold out, and which I'd never heard of before, and then all of a sudden each day was selling out, and it was literally sold out to the badge before the con started. Which, as a PAX goer, that's not unusual. There are other cons like Comic-Con that sell out, but Gen Con has always had more capacity than they can sell, and this is the first year that I've ever gone where it reached capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you think? Did it feel more crowded?
Well, it's weird because last year I thought they did a really great job of managing crowds. And I think somebody with some skill or knowledge in that regard probably joined their team. Mm-hmm. Maybe even somebody from like Disney or, somebody that there's a science to that. There's a science to dealing with massive crowds with multiple venues, and I don't think they had that expertise, or at least it didn't feel like they were leveraging that kind of expertise earlier. But last year, I felt like the placement of events and the placement of different things meant that you had people with good reason to be in different places all at the same time, so you didn't feel a huge impact, because last year was a really big growth year for them also. This year, I don't know, because I wasn't there and I had a lot going on. I do know that the vendor hall felt like a Saturday to me on Thursday. So that was, it was really crowded really fast. Although it did drain out, in the afternoon and go down to sort of normal Thursday levels. But there was definitely a surge Thursday and Friday morning that made it feel like it was peak con time. And normally what the old normal was that Thursday was crowded, really crowded, but it wasn't that crowded.
Right.
And it got steadily more crowded until Saturday. Excuse me. On Saturday, you could barely move.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like that Thursday and Friday morning. So that was a little frustrating and daunting for me.
Yeah, Thursday was particularly bad because they had a problem with the HVAC, which they fixed later in the week. So, but the vendor hall on Thursday actually, at least half of it was having problems, and it got really warm, and it got to the point where people were leaving because it was just too uncomfortable.
That's true.
But they seemed to fix that later in the week, so I was really nervous about that, because if the HVAC doesn't work all 4 days, that would have been rough. But they did seem to fix that to the point where, you're right, every day kind of felt like Saturday, but it didn't feel... No day felt worse than a Saturday. It felt,
right. That's a good point. That's a good way to put it.
You know what I mean? Like, it never got, like, I expected it to be unbearable. It wasn't. Like, it never got to the point for me I wouldn't go back. It was just like, wow, it's really busy now. And it's getting like PAX. I got to make sure I book my tickets way in advance. And, so that was a little disappointing. But the cool part was, there were two things about it that I thought were pretty cool. One was now this is, I think it was the second year that they were in Lucas Oil Stadium.
Yeah, last year they were in the underneath level.
Yeah, so this year they were underneath and in the stadium itself. So you could actually you could actually stand on the 50-yard line where the Colts play, and it was full of gaming stuff, which is pretty cool when you think about the fact that we're all nerds standing in the middle of a football stadium. But what's cool about this was on the tunnel. So there's this little tunnel between the Indianapolis Convention Center and Lucas Stadium. And as you're going through this tunnel, there's all these little side rooms, and all these rooms are full of cool stuff, like Artemis is down there and everything else. So there's like a whole bunch of stuff down there. And then you get to Lucas Stadium, and it's full of even more stuff. Like that's where Mayfair was. That's where the board game library was. And that was where this really cool tribute to Gen Con was. So they had this thing. Craig, did you see this?
No, I never made it out.
It was awesome. It was this little reimagining of this little garden greenhouse. And that was because where Gen Con was first held was apparently this little greenhouse thing. And it was sort of a faux building of this. And they had all these documents and materials and old versions of Dungeons and Dragons and everything. And this whole posters taking Gen Con through the years. And they actually had like original letters written by Gary Gygax back to different people saying, I went to this place and here's what I saw. And it was kind of a neat convention. And it was like the whole thing was really neat to read. And then they had all the old editions. It was like going down memory lane, seeing the original editions, some of the original books, the original deities and demigods and all these. It was just really cool. I mean, for an old guy like me, just really cool nostalgia. It was
that
also
sounds
neat.
Awesome.
There were panels of years at Gen Con from like 5-year increments. And they showed the crowd growth. And Craig, the amount of growth since we've been going, and we've been going since 2010, 9, something like that.
2008, Russ. When we first started, we actually.
I didn't
Russ,
go that year.
I mean, yeah, Rafe and I went 2008.
Yeah.
And we all went 2009.
Yep. So that time, that's when a lot of the growths happened. Like when we were going, the size of the convention was like 25,000, 30,000. It's like whatever it is now, over 80 or whatever it is now. But it's just really blossomed those last 10 years, even though it's been around for 50. So it was really neat to see all that as well. I was really pleasantly surprised by the still how fun it was. One of the funny stories. So we are, so listeners will know that Nicole's family, she has family in Pittsburgh. So we know Pittsburgh very well. So the hotel we stayed at this time, the Le Meridian, which was actually a great location. It's literally across the street from the Ram. Awesome spot. So we normally stay at the JW, which is also an awesome hotel. The cool thing about the
beautiful,
JW is
fancy, like modern hotel.
Very lovely hotel, huge, plenty of rooms, and the staff really gets into it. Like the staff will be dressed like when you're going up to the register for the day, for your check-in, there'll be a guy dressed as Gandalf behind the desk. Like they really get into it. The Le Meridian really didn't get into it. Like they were just doing their normal thing. I mean, they were very welcoming. They were like, "Hey, welcome Gen Con people, and have a nice time." But they were very much like they weren't doing the whole Gen Con thing. But you're across the street from the Ram. The thing about the JW that kind of stinks is it is connected by the Skyway to Indianapolis Convention Center, but it's a long walk. And it's not near any food except for the restaurant and the hotel. So to go anywhere for lunch, it's a pretty long walk. The Meridian's right in the heart. Like I said, across from the Ram, right next to the Steak and Shake, and it's like only 2 blocks to Scotty's instead of like the 6 it is from JW. So you can get to a lot of the great food right there. But what's interesting was, so I mentioned Pittsburgh earlier. So right next door to the Meridian is Primanti Brothers. Now, Primanti Brothers just opened up after last year's Gen Con, and I remember this because we saw the sign for it being built, and now people are like, what's Primanti Brothers? Why is he even talking about this? So Primanti Brothers is this amazing sandwich shop. There's actually a chain of them from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So Primanti Brothers only exists in Pittsburgh and some small areas around Pittsburgh, but now, for some reason that was only known to Pittsburgh, it now exists also in Indianapolis. And what makes the Primanti sandwich fantastic is they do a really good job with pastrami and corned beef and all these different sandwiches. But the cool part is they put everything you'd normally want on a sandwich and would with a sandwich on the sandwich. So it's, if you get, like, say, a pastrami, it's the cheese, it's then French fries, it's then coleslaw, and then it's the other slice of bread. So it's like all of that in a sandwich, and it is one of the most amazing things you'll ever eat. So there's the Primanti Brothers next door to the hotel. And we got to try this place because we like Primanti Brothers. But here's the funny thing. We literally got to watch Primanti Brothers, again, Pittsburgh, learn what Gen Con is over the 4 days. Because Nicole's a huge fan. I'm a huge fan. My youngest daughter fell in love with it. So we're like eating there like once a day for one of our meals. So we go in there. And the first day, they're just hanging out. They don't know what to expect. And it's actually not very crowded because most folks don't know who they are. So we're there going, oh my God, Primanti Brothers, and there's no line. Look at everybody across the Ram, all freaked out trying to get in line. We're here. And so the second day they start realizing there's these lines at all these other restaurants. Why don't we have a line? Oh, they're doing all this special stuff for Gen Con. So the second day, all of a sudden, half the sports TVs turn into movies, fantasy movies. But the funny thing was, and this is what I couldn't figure out, the funny thing was they put black and white movies. They put them in black and white. So we're watching Lord of the Rings in black and white. Which is
and silent,
which is a little weird because it changes the tone of the movie when you watch it in black and white and silent. Which is
does.
Strange.
I kept thinking we were looking at a flashback.
Yep. And then by the third day, they figured out they should open for breakfast, and then by the fourth day, they were actually wearing costumes. So it's kind of funny. They're kind of like, so next year they're going to have it all figured out. But it was really funny to see because for those who've never been to Gen Con, every restaurant pretty much within like a 5-mile radius of, or maybe it's 2 miles, but that is within walking distance of the convention center, does something for Gen Con because they try to attract, because it's all the restaurants are overflowing, right? They can't handle the volume. So there's plenty of people to go around, and it's just how do you attract people in to get them excited? So it was kind of fun to watch that happen.
Yeah.
What other things did you notice this year, Craig, that were a little different than last time?
I don't know. I mean, these are our patrons, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna pull the curtain back just a little bit and pull a Rafe actually.
All right.
Because I'm going to talk about this a little bit in the Did You Ever Notice? But so basically, my Gen Con was cut short because my dad's been sick, and he had sort of a routine procedure due on Friday of Gen Con. And so my brain wasn't really into it. I was kind of like wandering around like a ghost, and I did all the stuff I had to do and talked to the people I had to talk to and had a good time and saw some cool stuff, but I wasn't able to really appreciate it because I was a little nervous about my dad, and then things didn't go well. And that procedure resulted in quadruple bypass surgery Saturday morning. So, and I found that out at 4:00 Friday afternoon. So I had just finished my cool game of Joan of Arc and immediately had to start trying to figure out how I could get home. So, because it was such a late date and it's really hard to book flights and stuff, I managed to get on a flight, but that flight then got delayed for all kinds of reasons there were all kinds of mess ups along the East Coast. So I was traveling from like 4:00 in the afternoon, running around at Gen Con trying to finish up what I had to do and say goodbye to the people I had to say goodbye to, and then traveling, and I ended up getting to Dartmouth Hitchcock in northern New Hampshire at 6:30 the next morning. So I was basically traveling that entire time, and that wiped out a lot of my memory of Gen Con. And so I know that I was walking around with my head in some dark clouds. I know I wasn't really myself through most of it. And I want to apologize to those of you that I saw because you weren't really getting the best of me, that's for sure. So what did I notice? So that's why I'm hesitant, because I'm trying to remember what I noticed. What did I know? You tell me what it seemed like I noticed, and then I'll tell you if I remember. How's that?
Let's see. Well, let's see. We noticed that the mob to get in was crazy. Like, I don't think either of us tried to get in when the mob first entered, but that's kind of normal. But it was pretty because it was
I was inside actually.
Yes.
And I actually videotaped for the first time ever. Normally, I'm deep in the vendor hall when it opens, because I want to avoid the giant crowd as much as possible. Right. But I just happened, again, wasn't at my best. I was right at the doors when they opened, so I actually taped. I recorded some video of the mob coming in and tweeted that out to, I think, like a 10-second blurb of the mob coming in. It was daunting. Mm-hmm. It was daunting seeing that giant crowd. But you know what was weird was Scotty's was so easy to get a table on a Thursday.
Yeah, right.
That was weird. So we got in, and Star Trek, the reboot, yep, was on so loud to be completely a complete contrast to the restaurant Russ was just talking about, where it was in black and white and silent. In Scotty's, where we were trying to get our peanut butter burgers, mm-hmm, it was a blaring to the point where we were all just sitting there watching the movie.
Yeah, we were.
Couldn't really talk. But that was weird. But again, like you guys were telling me, like that was Thursday on Friday. It was probably much harder to get into. But again, to go off what you're saying, where the local more and more of the local restaurants are getting into the flair, I think you're going to see that crowd spreading out more. And another thing that I noticed that like doesn't have anything to do with the thing that I just noticed that I talked about is I was talking to Dan of Game Salute or whatever it's called this week, and he was mentioning that from now on there will be no growth to Gen Con. They're going to freeze the numbers at what they were this year. Yeah. And so it won't take up any more space. It is what it is forever now, which to me changes what it is. Because there was a lot more, you could be free flowing and you could you didn't really have to plan ahead for most things. Like you had to plan ahead if you wanted to do the, True Dungeon, then some other things, but for the most part you could probably get into stuff. And I feel like it's going to be more and more rigid and structured, which I think is a shame.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of True Dungeon, Craig, this is something we missed that our mom shared with us. So this year at True Dungeon, I think this might become a thing. Yeah. True Dungeon upped their game. I mean, they've always been impressive, right? But they upped their game even more, not only with the quality of the sets, but actually Patrick Ruffus wrote the script and the story for this year's True Dungeon. It was a two-parter. So you'd go on one day and do part one, and then you go on the second day and do part two. So if they're going to start getting famous fantasy authors to start doing the True Dungeon stories, holy cow.
Well, not only that, he didn't just write it, Russ. It actually happened in the King Killer Chronicles world.
Yes.
And that's what killed me. Like, that it happened in the Name of the Wind universe.
Right.
And that just drove me crazy. Of course, it kind of drives me crazy that we're waiting for the third book and the guy's writing True Dungeon scripts. But let's leave that aside. Yep. That was a little George R.R. Martin. But
right.
But still, I can't believe they did. That's such an awesome idea.
Oh yeah.
And talk about breathing new life into. And I just thought this right now, Russ. I mean, we were talking earlier about Dungeons and Dragons having almost no presence at Gen Con. Well, the last real remnant of Dungeons and Dragons was True Dungeon.
Right.
Right? Which basically played off of the old, was like third edition Dungeons and Dragons for the characters and the rules and everything that you're playing with. And it all happened in the Dungeons and Dragons sort of game verse.
Right. Yep.
And here they are now outside of that completely. And I'm sure they probably used all the same rules and everything.
Right.
Or I don't even know. Maybe this is my first regret regarding a Gen Con in years.
Yeah.
And it's that I didn't know that.
So next year, I think I might have to pay more attention to the True Dungeon thing. Because Craig and I, for long-time listeners, we did do True Dungeon for several years in a row and enjoyed it, but it sort of felt samey. So we took a break from it.
Oh, I didn't. I kept playing it. Russ thought
I took a break.
I kept playing it. This is the first year. I mean, I missed a year every now and then. This happens to be one of the ones that I missed. But they were always upping their games and remember every year I would talk about the puzzles and the special effects, and last year was crazy with all the special effects and the cool digital elements that they'd added. But like without friends to go with, it's not nearly as cool. So most of our friends stayed home, and Russ, Russ and I kind of at that point would be like, if somebody would ask us, we'd be like, maybe, but I've never been sort of the point man. Now, next year, Russ.
Well, here's the thing. My girls are getting into escape rooms now, which is basically a mini True Dungeon. Yep. So I think my daughters would like to try it, and so I think next year with them plus you and me, that's a team. We're good.
There you go. Yep.
Right.
Okay.
So
done.
That'll be the plan. So that was a new thing. That was cool. So nice to see True Dungeon still killing it. So that was cool. And what was the other big thing? I guess most of the stuff. The other thing I noticed was in general was just getting around didn't seem that bad to me. Oh, I know it was different too. So this was a thing as a mistake, I think. So my wife and youngest daughter really like, and I do too actually, but I had a meeting I had to go to, so I skipped it. But they the cosplay parade, right? Saturday afternoon, 3:00, the cosplay parade. Now, traditionally, the cosplay parade goes through the inside of the convention center. From one end of it kind of to the other, through one of the rooms, and everybody kind of knows the route. So as 3 o'clock approached, everybody started standing on what is the traditional route for the parade. Now, if you'd gone to the website, you would have seen the route change, but no one, I mean, who does that? So we would have thought, now, here's the thing, it did change, and where it changed, they decided to have a big chunk of it outside. Now, this might be sort of a nod to what happens at Dragon Con in Atlanta, where there's a giant parade of cosplayers going down, the 501st is marching like 200 stormtroopers down the street, Main Street. Excuse me, that all makes sense. It's not really been done in Indianapolis before, but what's worse is Dragon Con's the fall. This is still pretty much summer, and it's hot. And a lot of these costumes are not, they're heavy, they're warm, and you're getting people going outside 90-degree weather in Indianapolis in the summer and the humidity. Not a good call. So unfortunately, and then the other thing about this is the cosplay contest is literally right up to the parade. So normally what happens is they do the parade ends right where the contest is going to be, and then all the cosplayers go and get judged. Well, this year it makes a conflict now, because if you're going to walk outside in the hot and the sweat, and your makeup's going to start to run and everything else, right, are you really going to want to go to the contest in a disaster, all sweaty? So no. So a lot of the serious cosplayers didn't go in the parade because they wanted to be, so you kind of had, the parade was still fun, but you had a lot less participation. There were a lot more cosplayers in the thing. But I got to give a shout out to Cobra Commander and the rest of the Cobras. They were hilarious. Those guys were so freaking funny.
What about the Spaceballs guys? They were fun.
They were awesome also. So as always, I just love watching the cosplayers. The passion is awesome, and they have so much fun. And I love the folks who really get into their characters. They're just a lot of fun to watch. You can never have too many Deadpools in a room either. It's just a joke waiting to happen. So really enjoyed that as well. So that was. Craig, that was pretty much Gen Con. I thought it was another good year. Did you any negative feelings from Gen Con 50? Or are you like ready for 51?
Well, I didn't really experience it, so
you were distracted.
I have no negative feelings other than the fact that I feel like I missed it, and like I went there and I missed it. I have every intention of going again. I loved Le Méridien. I thought it was a great location. It's much more of a European hotel, so everything is a little smaller, but a little more refined. Their restaurant and bar downstairs, much smaller than the JW, but much nicer again. I didn't eat at the food trucks or anything, but it looked very well regulated. Did you guys at all eat there?
We just some snacks, just some cupcakes and things, but it was very well run. Not quite as crazy, and I will say one of the highlights was we were at the food trucks, and all of a sudden these trumpets go off, and there's a parade, but it's a parade of not random cosplayers. It's a parade sponsored by Fantasy Flight Games. It's the
L5R.
Did you see that one?
Yeah, I was with you. Yeah,
that was awesome, and they're like coming down, and they're all like in their Japanese feudal, samurai outfits with their banners. They looked awesome. That was like one of the more impressive things to happen. And that was right, again, in the food truck area. So I feel like the food truck area was kind of part of the convention almost in sort of a weird way.
It did feel. They had like Sun King, the sponsoring beer, had a big concert on the first day on Thursday too. Or was that might have been Wednesday? Yeah. That had a big long line, and a bunch of listeners were there. That was cool.
It was Thursday too, because They Might Be Giants played on Thursday. Which was right up against Play by Mob, right? And people still came to Play by Mob, so thank you.
That's true.
Appreciate
thank you for doing that. Yep.
So there you have it, Craig. They're going to kick us out of here soon. But I had a good Gen Con. I'm sorry your Gen Con. I'm glad it worked out, but I'm sorry your Gen Con was.
My dad is okay.
Was distracted, but
next year, you know what? Next year, hopefully next year. That's my plan.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.